Hey guys, it's Kaylee and welcome back to my reading corner. I thought I would do a bit of a Friday reads today and go over some of the books that I've read recently. I've been on a bit of a roll so far in January and I finished 5 books, which is a bit of a record for me, so I thought I would chat to you about them. I thought I would go in order of least favourite to most favourite, so let's get the disappointing one out the way first. The first one that I have is A Wrinkle in Time by Madeleine. This is, I guess, a classic of children's sci-fi, and we start the novel with our main character Meg, who is wide awake on a dark and stormy night. She makes her way downstairs to the kitchen and she finds her brother Charles is already awake, and soon their mum comes down as well. Before long, there is a mysterious stranger at the front door who they invite in, and this is Mrs. Watson, who is apparently someone that Charles met just the other day. So Meg and Charles are the children of scientists. Their father went on a job a few years ago and he has never returned. So that's a bit of a mystery. Meg and Charles go to visit Mrs. Watson after a couple of days, and they're joined by a friend, a new friend of theirs called Calvin, and the three of them end up going on a bit of an adventure with the help of Mrs. Watson and her two friends across the galaxy to find their missing father. This book starts out with beautiful atmospheric writing, and that does continue throughout the book. Unfortunately though, that was probably the only thing I enjoyed about it. Our main character Meg is not a very likeable character at all. She spends most of the novel complaining or moaning, and she always seems to want to be somewhere else. She doesn't actually seem to want to be on this adventure. I think she'd rather just be at home. It also kicks off very quickly, the action. There's not much groundwork laid in terms of world building and explaining the sort of sci-fi concept of the novel. It just sort of kicks off straight away. And I think because it was so quick, it just means you've got more questions and more confusion as the story goes on. I thought the relationships in the book weren't the most believable either. I mean, the siblings meet Calvin within a couple of days of going on this adventure. They've never met him or befriended him before in their life, and all of a sudden he is like their best friend and he's off on this life-threatening trip with the siblings. So I didn't think that was the most realistic, and I think the dialogue and the exchanges between all of the characters wasn't the most believable. Charles, our third character, is Meg's brother, and his character was also lacking quite a bit. I think again it was the groundwork was missing from him. He's portrayed as this like child genius, and he kind of has this, it's implied that he has this mind reading ability, but again that wasn't really explored at all. So it just kind of left you with more questions and more confusion. So although the concept of this novel was really interesting and fascinating, I just think the execution wasn't quite there. I think the plot itself and the pacing as well wasn't quite on point. There was a large chunk in the middle of the book that was quite slow, and then the last 3 chapters seemed to just rush together, and the ending was a little bit convenient in my opinion. So I probably wouldn't recommend this one. I think there's probably a lot more better children's fantasy and sci-fi adventure stories out there. So bit of an unpopular opinion, but it wasn't my favourite and I gave this one 2 stars. The next book that I have is The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes by Arthur Conan Doyle. This is my first foray into the world of Sherlock Holmes, and this is actually the first short story collection. It comes after 2 novels, A Study in Scarlet and The Sign of 4. Now, I've not read either of those novels, and I don't think you do need to read them before you try the short stories. I think this was probably quite a good place to start. They do reference the 2 cases from before, but they don't give any spoilers or any other information, so I think it's totally fine to start here. I actually really enjoyed this. Each story has a really clear setup of what the case is going to be, and then there's just beautiful descriptions of all of the characters, I think because Holmes picks up on all of the really small details from each person. And then each mystery is just wrapped up in the most unexpected yet enjoyable way. So yeah, I just loved it. Holmes himself as a character, he's very self-assured and he's kind of smug in quite a charming way. And I just really loved the little conversations that him and Watson had in between each of the cases. I think the only thing that I would say against this is because it is short stories, you don't get as much character development for Watson in particular and for Sherlock Holmes himself. I think if I was to read the longer form novels, I would get that backstory and a bit more character development for those two that I want. But as this is, I absolutely loved it and I gave it 4 stars. The next book that I read is The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This novel opens up with our main character Monique, who finds out that she has been personally chosen to write a feature article on Evelyn Hugo for the magazine that she works at. Evelyn Hugo is a famous movie star. She's in her old age now and she's been a bit reclusive over the last few years. But she was the sort of focus of quite a lot of press coverage while she was in movies, in part due to her 7 marriages that she had. So once Monique meets Evelyn for the first time, she realises that Evelyn actually doesn't want a feature in the magazine, but she wants Monique to write her life story. So Monique begins to take interviews every day in order to write her biography. So after this first initial setup, we start to get the narrative of Evelyn's life told from her perspective. And the story then interchanges between the stories that Evelyn's telling about herself, and also we see little insights into Monique's life, and the breakdown of her marriage, the relationship that she has with her mum, and also her coming to terms with her father's death, which happened when she was a young girl. For me, Evelyn's story is so deeply rendered and she begins to feel like a real person. I've heard quite a lot of people say that you kind of just want to go and Google all of the things that you're hearing about, all of the images and the movies and the dresses that she's worn. You just want to go and find it online. You just become so invested in her life and you really feel for her through all of the struggles that she faces. What I loved about Evelyn is that she's not a perfect person at all. She says herself that she's done a lot of bad things in her life, but she doesn't regret a thing, and if she could have a do-over, she would do exactly the same thing. I think she's just a really determined, strong-willed and unapologetic woman, which I love. So while Evelyn is telling her life story, Monique kind of sees parallels with her own life and some of the things that she's talking about. She's really inspired by Evelyn and some of the things that she does and how she acts, and she kind of uses that to confront some of the things in her own life and in her relationship and in her career. Unfortunately for me, I think because Evelyn was so vivid and bright, Monique as a character kind of paled a little bit in comparison. We don't get to spend as much time with Monique because most of the book is taken up with Evelyn telling her life story. And so I think I kind of lacked that emotional connection to Monique as a character. And I think that was just a little bit that let the book down for me. Overall, though, that was the only problem I had with the book. I absolutely loved Evelyn. I loved everything that she stood for. And I think Reid's writing was beautiful throughout the book. Really rich and very readable. So I would definitely recommend this one. I gave it 4 stars. The next book that I have I absolutely loved, and that is My Absolute Darling by Gabriel Tallent. This book follows the life of Julia, or Turtle as she is called. She's a 14-year-old girl and she lives with her father Martin. They both live quite a simple life in a rundown house in the sort of wilderness of the Californian coast. Martin is a very intelligent man. He spends his time reading philosophy books and talking about the state of the world. He has really strong survivalist beliefs, and this sort of paranoia about the world really shapes the life that him and his daughter live. There are a number of weapons in the house, and Martin trains and teaches Turtle on how to use these guns. Turtle is a really good student and she becomes really competent at being able to fire the guns, but she also gets really a lot of enjoyment out of the maintenance and the cleaning of the guns as objects. So obviously at 14, as Turtle is growing up and preparing to start high school, this kind of strains her and her father's relationship a little bit more. Martin himself is actually a very abusive person, both verbally and physically, towards Turtle. And we watch how Turtle internalises this and what it makes her feel both about herself, but also it makes her start to question the relationship that she has with her father and the sorts of feelings that she has for him. Watching Turtle meet new people and sort of push all the help and support away from her, and let the anger and frustration that's built up in her dictate her life, it's so heartbreaking to watch that happen. We read her thoughts through different situations in the novel, and I think it really opens up how complex her feelings are. One minute she'll be saying something, and then the next minute she'll correct herself, and it's almost as though Martin is in her own head, watching her constantly. Tallent's writing of the natural world and the environment, and also his colourful portrait of the characters, just make this book a massive emotional rollercoaster. You're definitely invested in Turtle as a character right from the very end of the first chapter. We're invested in her well-being and how she's going to turn out. And I think the novel makes you as a reader challenge yourself, and it looks at different themes that made me really stop and think. So although this is quite a difficult read, I would definitely recommend picking it up. I absolutely loved it. I gave it 5 stars. And the last book that I have to speak about today was another 5-star read, and that is Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. This is the beloved story of the March family, so we follow Meg, Jo, Beth and Amy as they grow up and become women. The story begins at Christmas time, and it opens with a really heartwarming scene of all 4 girls deciding that they're going to spend the little money that they have on a Christmas present for their mother. I think when I read that opening scene, a lot of people have said, I read reviews, that, you know, the novel could have become really sickly sweet and a bit heavy-handed with the morals, but actually it just unfolds delightfully. It shows each of the sisters' commendable intentions, but also their mistakes that they make and the lessons learned. Each of the sisters represents something completely different, and I think that's what makes the novel so widely loved, is that every reader can relate to something, some characteristic in the novel. For me, the emotional connection with this book was there right from the very first few chapters. There's a family that live next door, a young boy and his grandpa, and when the girls start to meet the two of them, those first few encounters just really were so heartwarming and honestly just made me have like the warm and fuzzies inside, and I just felt like I was part of the family. Alcott also doesn't shy away from the stereotypes of the time as well, especially with Jo's character. You know, she is a little bit rough around the edges, she's lovable, she's feisty, she likes to hang around with the boys, and she really just dismisses any ideas of romance and marriage, which I thought was great, especially for the time that this book was written. I thought that the story itself and each of the girls' paths in life were unpredictable, but they were perfect in the end. And the way that the plot is paced throughout the novel, I think, was done masterfully as well. This is definitely a family that I will not be forgetting anytime soon, and I think I will definitely revisit this many times in my life. I absolutely loved it, so I gave this one 5 stars. So that's everything that I've read so far this month. Please let me know if you've read any of these books and what you thought of them down below, and let me know what you've read so far in January, and I'll speak to you in my next video.